Today on Real Talk.
You know, a spiritual impact of food on your body. So, you know, we talk about you are what you eat.
Yeah.
But how?
We're going to delve into the growing health crisis in America and look at what role the modern food industry plays in this situation.
All right, guys, let's go into this room. Okay, so the topic of the show is the health crisis.
Who's to blame, like for like the bad health of this country?
It's a combination of things, right? It's parents and it's media. All you have around is McDonald's.
Yeah.
Well, genetics. I mean, there's some disorders that make you gain weight. Even though you don't eat a lot, it's just like you're prone to gaining weight.
We'll also examine modern health care as an institution and explore the growth of the alternative health movement.
That's pretty cool.
So hold off on all the tweeting and twittering and phone texting and come engage in some real talk.
So we're coming to you with real stories, real issues,
and real views from here in the USA.
Real stories.
Urban life in America is very diverse, fast-paced.
You telling me the prayers of those people, those among our people, weren't accepted? Do you really want to monopolize salvation?
This is Real Talk USA.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the US edition of Real Talk. I'm your host, Salam Bhatti. Today, America faces a very growing issue of health crisis and the fast food industry. 1 out of 3 kids are overweight or obese here in America. And since we are all kids at heart, we are all affected. Today, I am joined by 3 very knowledgeable panelists who will discuss this issue. Today, we are joined by Micah Tahir, who is an aspiring author writing about health from an Islamic viewpoint. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the show. Sitting next to him, we have Salim Arshad, who is a certified holistic health coach, who is also an author. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. And seated next to him, we have Dr. Bilal Rana, who is an anesthesiologist who works around here at the Johns Hopkins Hospital. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome.
Welcome.
And also, we have a very good and very opinionated audience who will help in this discussion. Now, before we discuss these views in our studio, let's see what the public thinks on the health crisis and the food industry for our segment, Word on the Street.
Obesity in America, it's a big problem. There's been a lot of conversation about the issue, but what are we actually doing to address this problem? Many commentators and people have opinions about how this has happened. Is it because of the fast food industry? Is it because people are just not being disciplined in their own eating habits? What's the cause? Today we're going to examine that.
You can get the best food in the world here, but you can also get the worst of the worst. I mean, really. And funny enough, the worst is also the cheapest, but you get it in huge amounts. And I would say that gives America a problem.
I still believe that the food in this country is still not as good as like other countries.
What are you eating over here?
Baguette.
What do you think about the food in the U.S. in general?
Most of the time it's rather heavy. It's not really light.
The food of the U.S. I think it's not so good.
The country is kind of set up with corn syrup and fast food, and you can easily fall into that trap.
I don't like things that are irradiated, that are genetically altered, that are, I worry about that. We have some very good things. Our food is very cheap, and that's probably because it's mass-produced.
People don't really care what they put in their food, in their stomachs. It's a me society. So if it tastes good, they'll eat it.
Definitely gluttons. We are gluttons.
I think people look to the government for miracles, and I think that folks don't have any sense of personal responsibility, and they need to get their acts together and just decide that they're going to eat right for themselves. However, a healthy food is more expensive, and if the government can do anything to lower that cost, then that's something that would be appreciated. Otherwise, I think folks come up with way too many excuses why they're not eating healthy.
Many people are into eating junk food and fast food today, but what are the healthcare costs? Is it really worth it? Are there benefits because of the economics, or is it that it's really affecting our health for the worse?
The healthcare system it's expensive. Insurance is expensive, and if you ever get sick, it's going to cost you a lot of money.
The healthcare system, for me personally, has worked out really well.
The escalating costs, I believe in a single payer system because I think that's what's working in Europe. And people who want more than that can always buy that separately. So I would like that, because that way you would get away with the middleman, the insurance brokers, who really don't do anything for you. They're just sort of middle people who are involved in healthcare without really contributing anything to your health.
I think anyone should deserve the proper health care. Even if you can't afford it, it doesn't matter. Everyone needs it, regardless.
I think the same too. Everybody should be able to have health care, whether they could afford it or not. Everybody should have it. It's a necessity, just like jobs are. Everybody should have one.
Obama's healthcare system, do you think that'll make things better, worse, the same?
We don't know yet. We don't know what it is yet, but
it's 1,000 pages long and we haven't read it. Yeah. It's not readable.
So you're hopeful that the reforms that we've undergone, do you think they'll help or hurt?
I think they'll help. I think, again, it's just a question of sorting through and getting people on board, getting people to agree and to realize that we are moving ahead. And you know, the healthcare system is trying to include everyone, and we're moving ahead.
It's true that government and schools and parents have a responsibility, but as the youth, we have to make a conscious choice at some point and take responsibility for our own health.
Those are some good viewpoints and issues that people on the street brought up. We had issues about obesity, about diabetes, about our children who are just languishing at home. And so I want to turn to our panelists. Micah, this health crisis, this food industry, what do you feel is the greatest concern right now?
Well, Salam, I think that one of the greatest concerns is the great shift in our diet of Americans and the world at large that occurred in the early 1900s, where we went from more natural foods to processed foods. In the process of those foods being processed, foods that were beneficial for us have been slightly altered to be less beneficial and possibly even harmful.
Very good points. Salim, what do you think is, in the overview of the health crisis in the food industry, from the holistic background, what are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with what Mike is saying. There is a multitude of different things that have happened to our food supply, and it's been modified and it's been broken down and it's been processed and refined. So because we're not eating whole foods anymore, we're having more and more problems with food-related ailments like diabetes, obesity, blood pressure, arthritis, men's health issues, women's health issues. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's really, really important for our youth to start paying attention to that because it does afflict them.
And Dr. Bilal, do you also feel the same way, or do you feel different from the medical background?
I agree with them, and in addition to them, I wanted to highlight the other big problem, which in the health crisis issue, is the delivery of health care and access to health care. A big issue right now in America is access to health care, and just to kind of give you an overall summary, we have a healthcare system for the elderly, and healthcare system for the indigent, and then we have privatized insurance. So if you're over 65, you have coverage. If you're really poor, and I mean really poor, then you have coverage too by the government. But if you're in between, you're in a no man's land and you have to pay very high premiums for insurance coverage, which is controversial in ways because they have incentives not to treat you because it is, after all, a business.
So we're seeing a growing chunk of middle America who don't have health coverage.
Absolutely. In fact, I think about 1/3 of Americans, so if you do the math, it's about 30 to 40 million Americans do not have access to health care.
Now, as a health coach, are you seeing many of your clients, these middle-class people who just can't afford the health care?
Yeah, it's a big deterrent, cost of the healthcare. But one of the biggest challenges for them is the long-term cost if it's not addressed, right? So if this healthcare is not made available to them, then they're not able to access, resources. Simple stuff like, working with a health counselor like myself, or going to a doctor for routine checkups and things like that. Preventive care is really, really important, but that's also a piece that's missing from the current solution that was been, proposed.
So one of the things mentioned was obesity. One of the statistics is that when kids feel good about their bodies, they tend to gain less weight over time. So part of this health crisis could very well be peer pressure, or perhaps bullying even, where maybe they start eating just out of depression. Now, Micah, from an Islamic viewpoint, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's been documented, per se, in the Quran that the spirit affects the body and the body also affects the spirit. There's a relationship there that goes back and forth. So it very well could be that when the spirit is brought low, it manifests itself with overeating or some other unhealthy habit. But it's also true that a person has a positive outlook, that can also influence their desire to eat healthy and eliminate certain bad habits. So with the child, the main thing is, which I'm sure we'll address later too, is that the propaganda or the marketing of these companies also produces a like for food that will actually cause a depressive state. These things that they eat can cause them to have depression, which can then cycle into eating more and further taking a downturn health-wise.
Now, for the audience here, we had peer pressure just introduced. Have you ever felt any type of peer pressure of eating a certain way, maybe eating too much because of the people you hang out with? Yes, Moment.
Back in high school, when we had off-campus lunch, I would go out with my friends to wherever they went, just because sometimes I would want to go to one place like Subway, like try and eat a little bit healthier or something, but they would always insist on the cheaper food or the more unhealthy food like Wendy's, McDonald's, and all that. So I would be sort of peer pressured into going with them to wherever they went because I didn't want to go eat by myself.
A very perfect example. I think one of the primary examples of McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King being so integral in this whole fast food thing is their colors. The red, the orange, it's all so bright. So the marketing has really taken a turn. So Bilal, when you're seeing patients come in, are you seeing these young people who have just seen the wrong color and they just need help?
I think children, adults, a lot of us need lots of help. It's really concerning among the youth because diabetes has become epidemic in this country, but we're beginning to see something we've never seen anywhere in the world, which is diabetes in children. And this is very alarming, very concerning because we've had 200-300 years in this country. We've had a dozen, maybe a couple dozen of generations. This is the first time that our children will actually live not as long as we do. So the trend was always that man in the United States was living longer and longer, but now we've reached a very sad and pitiful state where your children will live less long in terms of years than the parents, and that's very sad. Now,
Salim, Bilal just gave a very sombering statistic, and I want my kids living longer than me so that they can, provide for me more. How do you counter that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to just say that statistic is so powerful right now. We need to listen to that. We need to put our attention to that. And just to add to that, our children are actually dying before our parents. Our parents are beginning to survive their children, and a lot of it's from food-related ailments, such as obesity, which then leads to heart disease, which then leads to the diabetes that you're talking about, right? So it's a multitude of different problems. How do we start this? One of the most beautiful things about children is children will do what the parents do. And not to say that the parents are at fault, but there's a huge opportunity for parents to start making a shift. You know, as a health coach, when I'm working with parents, I work with couples at times who have, you know, a toddler or a teenager, and they're like, well, how do I get my, you know, a child to eat better? Or sometimes literally they will just say, please take my 10-year-old and fix them. And it doesn't work that way. And so I have to work with the parents and let them know they need to start making the changes.
Now, Micah, Salim just said that the parents aren't to blame. Would you say differently? Maybe the parents are to blame. After all, they are the ones that are driving. They could choose to not drive so close to McDonald's or just drive past it.
Well, with a young child, you definitely can't put that on the young child who has no knowledge or is even in control of what they eat. So there is a great responsibility on the parents, but there's also a responsibility on society, because parents are in some situations where they themselves can't acquire the best kind of foods. From the Islamic perspective, you know, we would say tayyib, you know, it's pure foods, you know. So when they're going about this day-to-day basis, they are taking responsibility of the next generation. However, once that child gets a certain age, the responsibility becomes theirs.
Do you feel that there's a right for these people to have health care?
Yeah, I do actually believe that everybody has a right to health care access, but I also think that society has a right as well. And that means that they have a right for you to take responsibility, to lead a preventive lifestyle so you don't get into these issues. So while you have a right to access and health care, society has a right on you that you take care of yourself so you don't become a burden on society at the same time.
Okay, I understand now. Now here in America, for the outside audience, each state has its own health care laws. So some states allow, as a student, you can go under your parents' insurance, but as soon as you leave college, then you are on your own. So I believe we do have some audience members who are in that stage, fresh out, and they don't have health insurance. Danish, you don't have health insurance.
Well, actually, I do now, but when I was switching, when I got off my parents' insurance, you know, I just left college and was just getting a job. And it was actually kind of rough because, you know, although it was a short time period, when you start a new job, if you don't automatically enroll into an insurance program, there's a waiting period. You have to wait like a year or something, or like 8 months before you can re-enroll into that program. So while I was waiting to get insurance, you know, I ran into some issues. You know, I needed to get contacts, for example, and you can't buy contacts and get re-examined, you know, for cheap. It's pretty expensive.
Now, what did you do to have some preventative system so you wouldn't get sick? Did you just change your lifestyle?
Well, I mean, you know, just all I do is, you know, obviously, you know, try to stay away from fast foods for one, but, you know, that's really hard to avoid. You know, you end up going there occasionally, you know, between lunch breaks, but definitely going to the gym frequently, you know, is a must. You know, everybody's doing that in the U.S. these days. But the thing is, you can go to the gym every day of the week, but if you're going to the, you know, McDonald's drive-through at lunchtime every day, it's really pointless.
Pointless, completely pointless. Now, Salim, as a holistic health coach, we do have the economy not on our side if you're a middle-class American. But if they are hitting the fast food and they don't have health insurance, what is the advice you're giving them?
Yeah, it's a very common diet to be eating fast food in the United States. And the biggest challenge is, you know, we love the taste. It tastes good, it's enjoyable. But one of the things I like to recommend my clients is they usually come from a place of fear that, okay, you're going to take away the tasty food, right? They come from a place of, well, okay, but this is just what I know. I don't know the healthier alternative. What is that, right? So first and foremost, we have to come from a place of education, right? To let people know that how when you eat certain foods or eat foods in general, how the food affects the body, right? He said a very profound statement, and he said, I am what I eat. You know, I always use the expression, you are what you eat, because I'm usually speaking to someone else. And it's really important to start understanding how food affects you. Having said that, when you're in an environment where you're eating a certain type of food lifestyle that isn't supportive to health, you don't want to make huge shifts. Most people that go on diets, whether if it's a different fad diets that have been out there, when they're usually going on those diets, they don't have the support system in place to sustain that. Those diets will most likely have had worked, right? Or they might not have worked for you because they weren't designed for you. What's missing is the slow changes that we need to make. Don't necessarily give up the fast food, right? Because your body's still going to crave it. So you'll be back there 2 weeks later or 2 months later or 2 years later, you know, in the drive-thru and still eating that food. The idea is to leave that imbalance alone, and it is an imbalance in our food, but slowly add in foods in the middle, you know, that are more nourishing and nutrient. And what you do is you can find some of these foods at these fast food establishments. You know, they do have some salads. You know, you can order the burgers without the breads and without the special sauce and things like that. Start small, start right where you're at. So it's not a huge separation from where you think you need to go.
Gradual change.
Yes, definitely.
Now, Michael, Islamic viewpoint on gradual, on moderation, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's several actually. You know, there's a famous doctor named Hippocrates, who's considered the father of modern medicine. And he said, let food be your medicine. If you look at food and your regular nutrition, it's something you do every day. It's not a short-term anything. It's a long-term for all of your life. So approaching health from that manner, you always have to think long-term, you know, and you mentioned yourself just now that eating in moderation is a very key component, you know, trying to keep that. But what people are not fully aware of is that the processed foods of today have chemicals, if you will, that are geared towards making you eat more because that creates repeat business. If you were to be given a hamburger, you know, the bun itself has high fructose corn syrup in it. Now, high fructose corn syrup, they've done many studies on this, and it shows that it has an addictive kind of quality. They don't call it addictive, but they call it creates a dependency. That's what they call it. So when you are trying to break free from eating fast food, you have to understand that it's not just your willpower. It's not just that you like sweets. Man has been evolved to like sweets. Man benefits from sweets from the energy that it gives right away. And when our ancestors were out and about traveling around, they would get good energy from that. So there's a need that goes way back. But the sweets we're getting today are not natural. If you had sugar cane, it would have a different effect than if you had sugar or high fructose corn syrup. You would almost feel like after eating it that you were missing something. Because if you have certain foods all the time, your mind becomes conditioned to want that again. So breaking free from the sugar intake is a hard thing, but it can be done. You just have to replace it with something more natural.
So Bilal, we just talked about some genetically modified food. What kind of effect does that have on the physical body itself?
So I think Mike was probably referring to epigenetics as well. Epigenetics. So basically, with that, it's a science that believes or argues that the food that you mentioned, that you are what you eat. The Providence Society also said that the food that you eat actually affects your morals or your behavior. And this relates to the concept of epigenetics, that the food that you take actually begins to modify the phenotype, the type of genetic output that you have, and the way you behave, and then also in the way that your body reacts to the food. So in terms of genetically modified food and food that's injected with hormones, I think that we as a society have to really take this issue real seriously, because we begin to modify, hormones change your organs, not just externally, but internally as well. And studies have shown that there are organic changes to the heart and different organs with the use of hormone-injected food. So it's not just a problem with sugar, it's a large problem from different angles.
And from the audience, yes?
Yeah, so I just have a question. From a cultural point of view, let's say I work a 9-to-5 job, I have an hour for lunch, so how can I change? I sit behind the computer all day, then I have an hour for lunch. How can I change that to be more active or to help to have a healthier life?
Out to the panel, anybody?
Yeah, I would say it would just start with one place, right? Because there's many different places to start from, right? We can start from, well, first of all, actually, what would be your health goal, right? I would really start from that. So you have a starting point, okay, what do you want to accomplish, right? So it could be, let's say you want to have more energy, right? So energy is usually associated with foods that we're usually eating, like the high fructose corn syrups, you know, that Micah mentioned, or other refined processed foods that aren't full of nutrients. And he's on point when he's talking about when we're eating foods that aren't full of the nutrients that we need, we're going to constantly crave them. Our body's natural tendency physiologically is, I'm not full yet. I only had 50% of the nutrients I need, get me the other 50. So we're going to go out and find that, right? It's usually the vending machine or the donut shop or somewhere, or the fast food shop or something like that. So once you figure out what your goal is, right, you need to look at, okay, what are the things that you need to support that, right? So the next thing you want to do is start with the food, right, and add them in slowly. Right, but I think that's a very general question that I would really want to sit down with you and really understand what's going on there. But you can definitely start somewhere. And I'll just give you a real quickly example. I was working 9 to 5. It was more like 9 to 24 hours or whatever. I worked in the IT field. Right, I was about 300 pounds. Right, I was very, very sick. I had sleep apnea, chest pains, restless leg syndromes, as well while I was in my 20s and young 30s. Migraines, depression, mood swings, you name it. Right. I could not exercise because my joints would hurt too much. So I needed a place to start from, right? I tried, different modalities of working out, things like that. It didn't work out for me. The reason why I say you need a goal for yourself is the issue of bio-individuality. What works for you will not work for him, right? So we need to figure out what are the things that are going to work for you. What are the natural foods that you need to eat that support your goals, right?
I just wanted to add, if I could jump in, I think that was remarkable what you said, amazing, and I'm happy for you. I just want to add that when I hear that question, I also hear, so I hear, what can I do, where do I start, but I also hear, how can I get motivated? What motivates me? And I think that's a real important part of the psychology to address, because people who have weight or lifestyle issues are often made to feel guilty. And because of that guilt, rather than getting better, they actually try and escape. And they do things that make them feel comfortable, like stay sedentary or eat more food or not change. So as to the question of what motivates you, it's important to educate people that disease, we begin to discover, chronic illness is reversible. Diabetes is reversible, hypertension is reversible, and we didn't know that before. We couldn't appreciate that before. You can actually get off your diabetic medication. I had a friend of mine who got off his diabetes medication after losing 30 pounds. Now he's scot-free, no medication. Not only that, the other aspect that I think will motivate you, is a sense of reward that I can, get better, is that you get better faster than you think. And as clinicians, we were also surprised that not in a matter of years, not even necessarily a matter of months, a matter of weeks, you actually start decreasing cholesterol levels and blood sugar levels. So very, very important to know that you can actually get better, and you can get better quick.
And we actually had a response from the audience as well.
More of a question. I'm hearing a lot of change what you eat. Genetically modified foods affect you in such and such way. I question, as a health coach and as a medical doctor, how much do you stress activity? Because a lot of today's society is inactive. So, and the truth of the matter is genetically modified food is accessible. We're in a society where we work hard. The only thing accessible is that for some people and for some socioeconomic classes. So how much do you stress activity? And with a society that isn't very active, what do you say to them? Does activity offset genetically modified food at all? Or,
Yeah, I think genetically modified food and activity are two different topics. But just first to address activity, again, it goes back to the issue of the point of bio-individuality, right? You are a unique individual. So what level of activity works for you? Gentleman in the front here will have no say in that. He doesn't want that. That's not, or maybe someone's not interested in the gym. Whether if it's a sweaty environment, the music or whatever, or I don't want to be in a community exercising. It has to work for you. And what's going to work for you, that needs to be figured out. A lot of times we have this, a notion that it needs to be so much. Right? We've calculated it out. So now we're playing a mind game of I need to exercise X number of minutes, so much sweat, or and then move on to the next routine, then move on to the next routine. Is that sustainable for you? Can you sustain that after we're done with our program or after you reach your health goal? Because if that's not sustainable, once you've left that form of exercise or form of activity, are your problems going to come back? Right? So we need to figure out what you need to do on a daily basis that's a part of your normal routine that works for you. But yes, activity is important. We have muscles and joints and we need to be moving them.
Now, from Micah, from the prophet, peace be upon him's point of view, from his viewpoint, from his life, from his teachings, is there anything that he left behind for us, even though he lived 1,400 years ago? Is there anything from his example that could help in the active lifestyle?
You know, in my research in writing this book, just to piggyback off of what Salim was saying, is that there are ways to incorporate, from a Muslim perspective, a spiritual zikr or remembrance of Allah with your physical activity. And for a lot of people, that can be a double motivation. For instance, when they used to set out on journeys and they would go ascend up a mountain or a hill, they would say Allahu Akbar. Then when they would descend, they would say Subhanallah.
But and rock climbing, that's no easy thing.
Rock climbing,
Yeah.
you know, if you're doing the stadium climbing or, you know, running up, you know, you can incorporate that. And that could be a source of motivation for people who are spiritual and look at it like that. The other thing, too, is that the traditional peoples, even in the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, think of the time of every prophet you ever knew. We are in a unique position today that is contrary to the way they lived. We spend hours in front of the television to entertain us. We have another 3 hours to spend in front of the computer. To eat our food, we already discussed it. You just get it like that. Pop it in the microwave or what have you. But the people of the old days, they couldn't live an inactive lifestyle. Everything they did, they had to make a move. So even if they weren't working out at the gym, they were doing a lot more movement and burning more calories and burning off fat than the average person today. Now, we're talking about a time frame from the beginning of mankind all the way up until this last century. So to combat that, we have to go to the gym, you know, and I usually tell people, frankly, if you're not interested in exercising, you're not motivated by that, I don't know what to tell you, you know. Get with some friends who are motivated and let it catch on, because everything is habit forming. The more you work out, the more, and you see what how you're improving, you'll want to work out more. So you have to just get in the rhythm. It's like, from an Islamic perspective, we talk about prayer. If you're not motivated in prayer, what you got to do is you just got to start praying, you know, and then you get into the zone like anything. So.
I wanted to add that I was watching television and they were doing, basically revealing the results of a study that they did visiting elementary schools and showing how much kids know about vegetables, and it was just shocking that children do not know what a cabbage is. They cannot recognize a cucumber. They don't know what a carrot is, all these basic vegetables, but they can recognize junk food real quick and right away. Speaks to the knowledge gap and lack of education.
And recently there was a study conducted that children can recognize the golden arches of McDonald's more than they can recognize the cross of Christianity, which is a huge epidemic. Now, Salim, you had something to say?
Yeah, I just want to add some to that as well, and especially in regards to education. I actually wanted to complete a point that I was making a little bit earlier, which is the definition of, the exact definition of you are what you eat, or I am what I eat, which is this: when you are eating food, you're digesting it, right? You're breaking it down, it's getting digested, goes into your stomach and it churns, and it goes into your small intestine. From there, your food that you've eaten, whether it's genetically modified, organic, conventional, whatever it might be, or even medication in that case, it's going from there into your bloodstream, right? The job of the bloodstream is to nourish and feed your cells, your tissues, your organs, ultimately your whole body. So those cells that it's feeding, I'm also talking about your brain cells, right? So if we're eating junk food, you are what you eat, you're gonna have junk thoughts, right? If you're gonna eat foods that are gonna replenish and nourish the brain, which are like essential fatty acids, which is basically fat, healthy fat, right? You're gonna have much more sharper thought, improved memory, you know? So education is so key. But here's what I specifically do when I work with my clients is, when I'm educating them, okay, now go apply it, right? So I've shown you, so we're talking about, you know, leafy greens or healthier grains. Okay, here's a sample. So you have it with you so you can take, or here's where you can go get it from. Here's how you cook it, right? And then we're following up with you, so there's a stand behind you. There's a support system in place to back up that education. So you're experiencing it. So education and knowledge ultimately turns to wisdom. And that's where the real power is. You know, a lot of the stuff that you're sharing and then the stuff that we're sharing, this is coming based on, you know, the experiences that we have and working with people, but also taking it on ourselves. So education is so, so key. It's a great, great place to start. Check out those films.
Let me just add one little point. Why it should concern a spiritual person, a Muslim, a Christian, anybody who's into spirituality, why the food aid is so important. If we recognize that if you snap at somebody, if you get stern or you get irritated with somebody and you say something that you shouldn't have, we would consider in any religion that's somewhat of a sin. Maybe a minor sin, but nevertheless a sin. If I told you that there are foods, and I wouldn't really call them foods, but there are substances that have been documented that will cause irritability, you might think to yourself, well, hey, wait a second, it's not really my fault. It's coming from somewhere. The Quran says that Shaitan is a sneaking whisperer, and he also says that he's an open enemy. So how is it that he's open yet he's so sneaky? Well, the thing is that there are things available that if you have the knowledge, you're aware that it can affect you. But the way it affects you is not so blatantly. If you take substances like Splenda, NutraSweet, Sweet and Low, there are documented scientists who sent to the FDA before it was even approved that said this can cause irritability, among many things it can cause. But that's just one example of taking a substance that you think, well, why am I irritable today? Why do I feel off? Why do I feel like this? And not realizing that it's in your system. It's affecting the way you behave, and it's taking you off your deen.
That was a great point. That was a terrific point. And in this first part, we talked about much of the health crisis and the food industry. In the second part, please join us for pharmaceuticals and how they take part in the health crisis, and if it is ever possible to become too health conscious. Please join us in a few moments.